Hello and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Yo. Each episode, I bring on great folks who are doing game-changing things in business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. And in this episode, it is no different. I am so excited to have Adam Woullard, our Managing Director of PR at VML Y&R. He has an amazing story, and you will love to hear it. So take a listen. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Laura. How you doing?
I know, stuff. The usual. Busy. But delighted to have you on the show. And
Thank you for
as we were
having me.
chatting, you've listened, so you know what the story is. So the first question is always the same, answer is always amazing. I'm sure yours will be no different. So, Adam, what was your first job?
My first job was at the University of Colorado in the Sports Information Department working with the football team.
That feels like it might have been fun, a smidge.
It was fun. So I grew up uh, just like a lot of young men. I was a huge sports fan and played sports myself, but was never a talented athlete. So I went to school.
Okay.
I'm 6'5". My dad is 6'8", but athletic talent uh, is not necessarily in the gene pool. So I knew I'd have to get into sports another way. I went to school to be a sports broadcaster. And upon finding out like the only job available to me was in Paducah, Kentucky, I, being from Colorado, wanted to stay a little closer to home. So called everyone I could think of, and the Sports Information Department, which is, I think the official title was Athletic Media Relations at the University of Colorado in Boulder, had a graduate assistant position open. I had some writing experience and had never really thought about PR or media relations, but the position was open, and so you take it.
Yes.
And that is how my career started.
Awesome. So what does one do when you first start out in this side of the universe?
So the working for a team is a little bit different than what people might think of in terms of traditional public relations. So my job was to do things like go to practice and write up a practice summary, like what happened at practice, because in most college programs have their practices closed to media. So we'd write up a summary of practice and send that out to media. We'd write press releases. During the game, you collect stats. I was on the sideline during the game, which meant if there was an injury to a player, I would work with the trainer to get an answer. And I would pass on that information to network TV and the local sideline reporter. What I spent most of my days doing was setting up interviews for the players on the team. So we had, again, like most college programs, we had a closed locker room, meaning media weren't allowed to come in. So my job was to go down into the locker room and convince players to do interviews, to come upstairs into the lobby where reporters were waiting, and we would do our media there. So there was a lot going on that year. We had Jeremy Bloom, he was a football player, also an Olympic level slalom skier. He sued the NCAA to be able to accept endorsements, not to line his
Uh-huh.
pockets, but to pay for his skiing expenses because he was essentially doing both. Also, interestingly enough, his sister is Molly Bloom, who you may know from the movie Molly's Game. So he was the first athlete I worked with. He's gone on to great success and other things, played in the NFL for a minute. We had a Heisman Trophy candidate running back named Chris Brown. So managing his media was interesting. And then we had a quarterback who early in the season just skipped town in the middle of the night. So with everything happening with the team that first year, I was like, I kind of like this sports PR thing, and I would do that for quite a while.
That's amazing. I think that's awesome. How did you just up and leave in the middle of the night? Like that seems wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, left in the middle of the night, never came back. And so we had two other starting quarterbacks that year. One of them, sports fans will know, Joel Klatt, who is now a college football color commentator for Fox. Just the amount of stuff that happened within that season and all the problem solving that one has to do as part of a team, I found really intriguing. Also, at that age, super cool to be able to travel with the team. It really becomes a community that you're part of. And I think that's what made the switch is you really felt like you were part of something. And when players got in trouble, as inevitably you have 100 young men in a locker room, and they're out about in Boulder, some things are going to happen. So helping guys work through those kinds of things really convinced me that sports PR on the team side or just PR in general was the thing for me.
Awesome. So you've had quite the career in the land of sports PR to how you've landed with us at VML Y&R today. So I feel like there's some football teams and some people you might know that you might want to share that with the group.
Yeah. So after 1 year at CU, I had actually played. It was a graduate assistant position, so I had 2 years. But got a call from my boss. Got a call from the Green Bay Packers and someone who had worked at CU during his early career, and he said, "Hey, I'm really struggling to find good interns. Do you have any candidates?" And my boss said, "I do," and recommended me. And I was like, Green Bay? I'm not sure about that. But I went out, and it was right after they had renovated the stadium and got to meet a lot of people in the organization and got really excited about it. And so they offered me, after I went through the interview process, a 1 year internship. And so I went through that year. And again, really felt part of something. Also, just for sports fans, like noticing the speed of the professional game versus the college game, and then just the professionalism of the guys on the team, both on and off the field, was something really cool. So after that first year, I was going to go to NFL Europe. I think a lot of people forget that there was at one point a developmental league called NFL Europe with by the time that it ended, there were 6 teams, one in Amsterdam and the other 5 teams in Germany. And the Germans really love American football. And so I was supposed to go to Frankfurt, Germany, and basically spend a season running the PR department for that team. And as I was kind of preparing all of the details for that, my boss at the Packers asked me to stay. And there were some players who spoke up for me as well to convince them to hire me, which I'm grateful for. And I ended up being there for 7 years. If I don't know if there's a better word for this, but I suppose my PR claim to fame is that I helped Aaron Rodgers through the Brett Favre Aaron Rodgers crisis, where Brett Favre retired, decided he wanted to come back. Green Bay told him no, and that obviously put Aaron Rodgers in a tough position. So in the locker room, we all had kind of our own guys. So Donald Driver, Charles Woodson, AJ Hawk, those were my guys, meaning if interview request came in from media, it was my job to go and line them up for their interviews, which wasn't always easy. Of all the departments that work with players, if you think about trainers and equipment staff, There is a professional development staff. They're all providing a service to players where we were asking something of players. So showing the value of public relations to players was really important. And I think Aaron Rodgers was a guy who was bought in early and every day, especially during that crisis. I would be at his locker at 6 a.m. with talking points based on the news coverage from the last day. We would work through that. And then when he had his media availability, either with our local media or if he was doing a national interview, we referenced those talking points. And he was also pretty good at it just naturally. And so I take great pride in being able to put him in a position to obviously his play on the field is his own, but his off season is off the field success and reputation. I was proud to be part of that, and I have to caveat and say I did not advise. I left in 2010, so I have nothing to do with him as a medical expert or conspiracy theorist or whatever else people might say about him. But that is something that he developed on his own as a player, and it's fun to tease him about it.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So Adam, as we talked about before we had this conversation on the podcast, is that I don't see a lot of Black men in PR.
Right.
And much less guys who are 6'5" and look like football players. But yet don't play football. So how has that been for you?
That's a really great question. So I guess I'll be a little bit vulnerable here in saying that I think I worked in sports for so long because I was a large Black man, and you didn't see a lot of Black men in PR at all. So when I went to the agency side, there was one other Black man who I knew who worked at the same agency I did, but uh, very few at all. So going from a locker room where it was obviously all male, with the exception of some female reporters, into a PR agency as one of the only men, period, and a Black man at that. It was a bit intimidating, and I had to really think about how I was perceived. And then I would say I had a job in between here in Colorado where I live, which was a little bit different, but still based in sports. And then really this position at VML YNR that I'm now leading up US PR for VML YNR. I don't know that maybe there is, but I don't see too many Black men in PR leadership positions. So especially getting out of sports, it was thinking about how to navigate that. And I would say being at VML YNR has been they've made it really easy, but it is something I'm cognizant about and that I take very seriously as a Black leader. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to show up as my authentic self. I do that as much as possible, but I do understand that it is a role, and not to give myself too much credit, it's just that it's a role that's bigger than me, and I know that these kinds of opportunities aren't given to us. And so I take that very seriously. Mentorship is hugely important to me to hopefully bring other Black talent into the field. And I am grateful for the position that I'm in.
Awesome. And 'cause I know, because, it was funny because like when we met, I was like, what do you do? It's like, I was like, awesome. Because, I think we've talked about the fact that like, in our respective positions, when we are the only one, we sometimes think, okay, the weight of the world is all on our shoulders because the only people they see in this world are us. How has that been for you?
I think when I show up similar to your reaction, I think there are times where I show up in physical rooms or virtual rooms, and they're like, "Who are you and what do you do?" And I say, "I'm Adam Woullard, and I'm the head of USPR." And I get a "oh" from from a lot of people in the room. And then what I like to think is like, ask me a question and give me 5 minutes to answer you, and your skepticism will go out the window. In other words, I pride myself on being an expert in the field, being able to articulate what I do for a living. Um, and any bias, which we all have them, whether we like to admit it or not, any bias, I think, is quickly dissipated once I uh, show that I can hold my own in any room. So that's my short answer, Laura.
It's a good one. But I guess but honestly, look, navigating this universe is obviously challenging. So talk to me about a time
Yeah.
when you're like, there's no way that I'm going to figure this foolishness out. And then you did.
Just in PR in general,
Whatever. Whatever you like to pick.
I got a great story because I mean, when I tell people about my career, they want to hear the Packer stories. So I have a good one, and I don't think he would mind me telling this story. But Charles Woodson um, played cornerback in the NFL for many years. He was a Heisman Trophy winner at University of Michigan, one of only two defensive players, I think,
I
to
remember
win.
watching him.
Yeah,
I'm a college football fan, so I remember.
yeah. So Charles, and not just a great football player, but I think he had like a 3.9 GPA while at Michigan as well. Like a really
Right.
smart guy. He came to the Packers from Oakland. He had a pretty bad breakup with them and kind of tumultuous relationship with management and the head coach. And he came to Green Bay with kind of a chip on his shoulder and very well spoken and intelligent. He did media in the preseason. He became one of my guys. And so he says something to me once the regular season starts that no player had said to me. He said, "Hey, now that the regular season is starting, I'm not doing I'm not doing any media." And
Oops.
I said, "Oh, well, it's not going to work in Green Bay, Charles. Like you are." And I think people think of like because Green Bay is small, they think of Green Bay as a small media market, but you have to remember like that is the news in that state and even in surrounding states. So we had as much media in our locker room as a LA team or a New York team, and people don't believe me, but every Wednesday when we'd start our media availability for the week, people from all over the state drive into town, and we had a full locker room, and my job was kind of facilitate all of that. So that I say that because it was important for Charles as the new guy and for a defensive leader to do media, and we really again prided ourselves on making all of our players available at some point. Some less than others, but definitely more on average than other teams, I would say. So my strategy was knowing that he had so much heart for the University of Michigan. I started by bringing Charles just some like University of Michigan related media outlets who wanted to speak to him about his time in college and his new home in Green Bay. And so we started there and then built into doing more national stuff. And then an interesting thing came up when Charles Woodson started his own wine label. And there's an interesting rule in the NFL that players are not allowed to promote alcohol brands. And
Oh.
and the question to the league office was even if they own it, and the answer was correct. He cannot promote alcohol. So whenever I got a request for Charles, I would say, yeah, sure, you can talk to him, but you can't ask him about his his wine brand. And they were like, what wine brand? I was like, well, it's Charles Woodson Wines, and here's all the information, but you're not allowed to ask him about it. So him at the time with this wine label trying to get distribution in restaurants around the country, we used that as a unique way to get publicity. So there were headlines produced, which were Charles Woodson has a new wine brand and can't promote it. And that became a storyline that helped promotion. So being able to show him the value of PR rather than it just seeming like I was asking him to do interviews was something that I didn't think I'd be able to get past, but we did. And in fact, he started off having a good year. I think this was 2009. He was having an outstanding year and a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. So he came to me and asked for more PR. So we went from, I don't do this, to, can I please have more? And we ended the season with him winning the Defensive Player of the Year award. And because it was a media award, the head coach let me call him and tell him that he had won it. So that is one of my favorite PR success stories. And that's what I pride myself on still to this day. I think that often PR, even internally at our agency, is thought of almost as legal, like we're throwing up red flags and we're watering down ideas. And my job, I love working with our creative teams at VMLY&R. My job is when I show up to an initial creative review, is here's the ideas that I think will really work from an earned media standpoint, and here's how I think we should build them. So really being partners, either with your teams or even people you're managing up to, and making them look good, because a lot of people have perceptions about PR that are justified really based on how the industry behaves. I like to approach it differently and think of like, I'm here to help make your creative better. I'm here to build your business up. Let's look for unique angles. And that's what I think, that's the reason I think I've been successful is I want to see everyone succeed.
And that's awesome. And I think it's a testament to like the fact that like there's so much strategy that goes into what PR is. It's not about just, taking a reporter out to dinner to get a to get a story out. There is an actual process and strategy and creativity that's necessary to get this work done. And not everybody can do that, because I think that oftentimes is a misperception of what PR is. And I know it is extremely challenging, which is why I always tip my hat to PR people, because I cannot do that. It's
Yeah,
not my lane.
yeah, it is. I mean, media relationships are important, but especially for people getting into the field, I would say recognize that things have changed. The pandemic has changed business for all of us, but also because of technology and the economy and a number of other reasons, as we sit and have this conversation today in September, almost 30,000 journalists have been laid off. So I think that PR is being more recognized as something that organizations need. So now you have more PR people than ever and fewer by 30,000 journalists to pitch, and it's already a pretty small world. So it's make that relationship, but then also how do you create ideas that break through the noise? An editor told me he has 600 PR pitches in his inbox, and I need him to notice mine. So there are tricks to get noticed, but more importantly, is this idea. It's a really a value exchange. Is this idea from our firm a piece of currency that we can use to give to a reporter that will make them look better to their boss and their readers and every other stakeholder who they think is important? And so having tough conversations internally and with clients about what is newsworthy, what is breakthrough, is something that I do every day, and have managed to have some good success here with those things, and that excites me.
Awesome. So cool. So obviously you've done a lot of really cool things in your career. Looking back on where and how far you've been able to come and rise and and be a unicorn in our industry. Like make no mistake, you are definitely a unicorn in our industry. And what do unicorns do? Shine forever. So it's a good thing. What do you think you'd tell 18-year-old Adam?
What would I tell 18-year-old Adam? Well, sometimes it's the same thing I would tell now 43-year-old Adam, which is you can be passionate about your job, but don't take things personally. I would really tell 18-year-old Adam, you don't know everything, and maybe listen more than you talk. Um, 18-year-old Adam was pretty confident as well in the jobs that he did, but I think it was really 18-year-old Adam, you're good at it, but I want you to think about the way you cultivate professional relationships and how do you nurture those relationships so that those people feel respected and they feel that you're on their side. And those are some things I learned along the way. I think, an early valuable job, not directly in the field, but I was the student assistant coach for the women's basketball team, and I just remember those two coaches, both women coaches, talking a lot about loyalty. And that was something that really resonated with me as time went on. And I saw how much, like, when you show someone that you're really committed to helping them, um, how far that goes, that has really been the key to my to my career so far in relationships.
Awesome and so cool. And I think it's important. And I think that loyalty, that trust, but also being places folks don't expect you to be. And
Yeah.
then when you walk into those rooms, be like, and I'm here. Uh,
Yeah.
it works. It absolutely
Well,
works.
yeah, and it's a weird thing because we're not to get too political, but we are in this time of cancel culture and this like oh well you're virtue signaling and you want people to think you're a good guy. Like it is unfortunate that like when you do something good publicly too, sometimes it can be scrutinized in a negative way. So an example of that is I had a podcast in my 30s. It was with a coworker I worked at Fleischman Hillard. He had left and gone to another agency. So we started like a sports culture podcast. And we decided to do a piece of video content, which was we had noticed that female sports reporters more than anyone else, were harassed and insulted and verbally abused on Twitter. And a way, you could say Twitter is generally a cesspool like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for female sports reporters, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so we did a video self-produced with a local partner in Chicago. It was called More Than Mean, where it started out like reading mean tweets, kind of like Jimmy Kimmel style, and then they got more and more brutal. And we had these guys who didn't know what they were walking into read these tweets, and we put that video out, and it got 7 million organic views in 2 days. And ESPN spent a day of programming talking about it. And it was really as good as much as we were like, great, we did a good thing. There were also those that were like, look at these social justice warriors, and the I think, and I say all of this to say that I there were from the critics there was such skepticism and so little empathy for what these women went through, and to a lesser extent, which I don't care about, empathy for the guys who were making the video because they just generally like I love working in sports and wanted to do something good in sports, and so like the amount of cynicism and the lack of empathy that we see in media criticism is one thing that makes my job harder. And to our previous point, like I'm going to show up how I'm going to show up, no matter what the critics say. But it is disturbing how much dissension and division there is, particularly perpetrated by some media, not all media, but by
Now, sir,
the usual suspects. Yeah.
that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. Yes.
Because I think again how we get stuff in the media, as Black people, much less as a Black woman, I could tell you stories make your hair stand on fire.
Oh, I
And I
bet.
am not in the media. I literally am not. I mean, I am, but I'm not. Because again, the podcast is like, was designed for shining a light on people that folks don't realize exist, and doing it in a way that isn't like, oh, poor you, no one heard of you, but like
Right.
just celebrating how awesome you are. And in this almost 7 years I've had this podcast now, I have learned so much, and it's interesting sometimes what people hear, because like I remember one time I had someone on the podcast and we were talking about like what it means to have a Caribbean American upbringing versus an African American upbringing, and how they are different. Like
Yeah.
they are drastically different, because our experiences are just not the same. Like people will all lump us all into one bucket and say that we're Black, and I'm like, yeah, but no. Our upbringings, our experiences are going to be different because of our family histories. And someone took such offense to that. And I was
I
like,
saw that review, Laura, and I
it is
was
the
blown
only bad
away
review
because
I've ever gotten in 7 years.
yeah, all you were saying is Black people are not a monolith, and the I in our conversations about DEI, I've had people ask me, well, what is the Black experience? And I'm like, that's the point. It's very different for a lot of people. So yeah, I was surprised by that too.
But I think it's like, and when you're trying to show people that the world is different and look at things from a different perspective, some people immediately retract back and pretend that they are back home and like want to fight for their home, because like apparently like by you showing them a glimpse into another world, that's going to somehow personally affect their lives.
Right.
And like that's why we have all this like very heated, very ugly conversations online and in the media, because like the ability to have nuance, and understand that not everybody is the same. And like if we make even the joke about Travis Kelce we were talking about today, what he looks like
Hmm.
versus with a beard versus a mustache, and what that looks like and what that means. And
Right.
it's wild. It literally is wild. Like but it's also led to like wildly racist things that have been happening to his ex-girlfriends. And you're just like,
Yeah.
and it's like all because he shaved his beard, you all somehow think that he's now in a different camp. Like,
Right.
and
Everyone wants to people who wouldn't have claimed him before now are fine claiming him.
but it's like, yeah, he like does Bud Light commercials, supports Planned Parenthood, and does all this other stuff. It's like, sorry. So it is just fascinating. And I think that the role of how media gets wildly construed, and it's interesting because you started when there was like early social media days, so now
Oh,
it's completely different.
Laura, let me tell you that when Twitter came out, like no one really knew. It was like, is this like MySpace? Like what this is my friends seeing this? And so my job, once media took notice and realized, oh, if I can't get access to a player, I can at least get access to their Twitter feed. I would print out um, a few different players' Twitter feeds every morning, and I would wait for them to show up to the locker room, and I would sit next to them with the highlighter, and I would go, no, no, please don't do that. And they're like, no, it's just my friends,
Don't no,
or
nope, nope,
no,
nope.
people really like this. And the question was asked, are they laughing with you, or are they laughing at you? And figuring out those early days of social media and how to best use it, yeah, it was wild. And I would say it's still like I'm so glad I don't work for a team, because that is a whole other job of like, it's hard enough just to manage what a player is saying during their media availability. But on top of that, they've got their own channels. And of course, there are guys who are really good at it, or more importantly, athletes who will hire people to do their social media, which I think is a great idea. But yeah, it is both a huge benefit in the world of sports and a liability.
Well, I mean, look, you can take it, you can see what's happening at Coach Prime right now, and then the
Yeah.
coaches' reactions behind that, and then the clips to get put up online and how those get it is very insane how there are these weird lines that have been drawn where football kind of used to be like the great unifier, like you have your team, whether you're a Giants fan, a Packers fan. And it kind of, for a while, was it kind of the last bastion of less crazy.
Yeah.
And, I think what's happening with Dion right now is a microcosm of how, like, the world has gone completely upside down.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a lesson in it. It's like, I'm going to now tie two things together. Okay, so we've got that morning show episode that went viral this week with Nicole Berry, and you've got Dion. And it was very interesting to see how those two things blew up at the exact same time, the latter part of this past week. And they both were talking about fundamentally what it means if you're a Black person in business and you try and you're trying to conform or people's expectations of you, and shouldn't you just be happy to be there? And it's been fascinating to see what that dialogue has become, because it's crossed over back into our world of advertising, because Nicole Barry thing has been all over on LinkedIn, and as well as all the Dion stuff. Like, on the one hand, it's brilliant branding on his fine, but then it's like, what are these other coaches like? Are you showing your January 6th tattoo by the way that you're responding? And it's been fascinating. What have you seen
around Deion Sanders specifically, or just on those topics?
I think either one. Either one of them.
Yeah. I saw, so having worked at CU, it is very interesting to see 20 years later, now that Deion Sanders is there. I mean, we're talking about a program where Rashaan Salam, a Black running back in the 90s, broke the 2,000-yard rushing mark, which has only been done by a few players in college football history. And the stands were half empty because it was the opening weekend of ski season. So
Wow.
to go from that to seeing a Black head coach at CU with a team that is 75% Black is a sign of progress. And CU won their first 3 games, and then they lost this past weekend 42-6. And to see, and I told people around me that it would happen. Like, when they get that first loss, just watch. Like, you will see that these folks who you thought were inclusive aren't so inclusive. And that particularly showed up Saturday on social media. Like the kind of language used about Deion Sanders as a head coach you hadn't heard up to that point, but you knew a coach who was so confident as a man and as a Black man, and in his Blackness, you knew that those comments were going to come. And sure enough, they have. And now this week they're going to play USC, one of the best teams in the country, and they don't have a great chance at winning. So this would be an unpopular thing to say, but having lived in Boulder, and Boulder being mostly white, I always said about Boulder, like, it's easy to be liberal and inclusive when you don't know any Black people. And I think that you're seeing that show up fully, not fully yet, but I think that if Colorado loses a few more games, that you will see that ugliness continue to surface. And it's disappointing, but not surprising.
True. I think that is true for a lot of things where it's like I think we are sort of like retrofitted to be disappointed and not surprised.
Yeah.
Because so
That's
many
right.
and because like so many people in the episode of the morning show were like, that happens all the time. Like,
Hmm.
why aren't you just grateful to be here? Like, I did enough for you. Like, I was talking to someone who's very senior at a brand, and she said to me that someone said that to her recently, like recently, where it was like, well, because she was explaining her experience, and you're like, but did that really happen? Are you sure? And
Right,
it's like,
right. As if
this is
as
a
if it's
question.
just yeah, like it's mythology that we're just regurgitating. Like, no, this really happens. Let me tell you how it happened to me. And then it's thought of as anomalies and isolated incidents rather than a pattern. Like, I never thought that it would be so hard to convince people that systemic racism actually exists, but no matter what information you give some people, they will deny it.
Because they don't see it in their universe. Like, what do you mean? I have so many Black friends. What are you talking about? Like, we all go to brunch and our kids play together and do play dates. What do you mean?
Yeah,
And it's like, yeah, but do you have any other white friends who have Black friends? Like, because that's always my
right.
test. It's like, but it's
Good.
interesting how the media perception of that, because like so many like a friend of mine posted the Nicole Vari thing on LinkedIn, and a lot of people were like, but that doesn't really happen, and they got dragged for filth justifiably. It's like you don't know what our experience is. It's like you either choose to shrink yourself or you need to be loud and proud. And with the Dion thing,
Yes.
it's like, did you not watch him play football and baseball? That's literally who he was. He was
Yeah.
not going to change. His name was prime time because he backed it up. He had, I think, a home run and a touchdown. I think a kickoff return in the same weekend.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, yeah,
unlike,
yeah.
y'all crazy. If you thought he was gonna be like, let me be here quiet and I'll just be looking at my Microsoft Surface and going through the stats. Like, what? No. I was like, that's
Well,
not what you were
like,
buying either.
yeah, and this happened a couple years ago. So interesting that, spending 7 years in Wisconsin and making a lot of I will say so-called friends in some cases, that people who I thought were friends, when the Milwaukee Bucks during the bubble season walked off the court after a black man in Racine had been shot 9 times at point blank range by a police officer, when those players expressed themselves, they were met with criticism from so many of these people who I thought were my friends. I saw this expressed on social media. And then these very same people went on to celebrate those same players when they won the championship the next year. And I said, um, oh, I thought that you were done with them. By all means, if you're thinking about getting season tickets, hand them over to me, because remember, you don't like these guys. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we're talking about is this, still looking at black performers and entertainers as minstrels rather than as humans. And that became very clear, and I'm glad in a way, because I was able to clear some people out of my life who weren't truly my friends. But I think yeah, same argument of like, be happy that you have a job and you get paid what you do. We don't want you to use your platform. And my response to that was like, well, good. If it makes you uncomfortable, that's the idea. And also, you're 40 years old. This isn't for you. This is for your kid who is sitting and listening, that maybe they will develop some critical thinking and think about these issues with a little bit more nuance than you're considering.
Absolutely. I think it's like the word nuance seems to be very lost on people. It's like not everything is black and white. It's
Yeah.
gray. And it's all different hues of gray. But you have to come with it with some degree of understanding that not everything is for everybody. Like,
Right.
not everyone's gonna love Megan Thee Stallion's knees. Cool, not for you.
That's right.
Like, totally fine. But don't you dare start from twerking. Like, you may not like what Cardi has to say. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, for you. Like,
Right. Like, you don't have to like it. Just don't get in the way. Just get out of the way. Let them do what they're going to do.
well, it's interesting. I mean, like, we see in our land of advertising, like, I'm sure you've seen what Fly on a Boss has been able to do, which I absolutely love. Because they're getting brand deals everywhere, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
They literally said we want brand deals, and they got it. And then I saw that Missy did a remix of it, and I was like, this is the most glorious thing ever.
Yes.
It's like, and it's the same deal. It's like not everything is for everyone, but like, do you understand that like the world's changed and like the mediums that you can now use to communicate have been somewhat democratized?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Can I tell you something I've been pondering lately?
Ponder away.
Um, there is, this really relates to this conversation about race and inclusion. And so Hanlon's razor says, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And I will say, maybe in the case of DEI, you do have to give some grace and some time. And maybe not stupidity might not be the right word in this case, but ignorance. But then on the flip side, there's Gray's Law, which I've only seen, this is an internet thing. I've never seen it attributed to anyone. The Gray's Law says um, incompetence sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from malice. And I think in the context of this conversation, where I get frustrated is if you don't believe something, there are an unlimited amount of resources, whether that's scholarly journals, books written by experts with credentials um, who use primary source material. There is enough evidence to suggest that systemic racism has been a thing and is still a thing. And if you don't want to solve it, fine, but don't get in the way. And at some point, that ignorance and the refusal to take information in when it's available to you is as malicious as being a deliberate racist. Like, you you just don't want to participate in this conversation, even though the answers are out there. That's something that I really struggle with. I think both personally and professionally, of like, well, no, we don't want to take that stance because that's your opinion. No, this is not an opinion. Here are the numbers. Here is the information. And if you choose not to act on that information, then you're part of the problem.
Exactly. It's like this is really simple. If there is a giant pie, and for hundreds of years, in order to get the pie, you had to walk through fire, over a fence, through barbed wire, and other folks could just walk up and cut a slice of pie. That's it.
Yeah,
That's
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 it.
really what it is. Like,
And no
I'm
one
not
is
making this
saying
up.
that you did.
You
Yeah.
had to do that. I literally had
No
to
one
walk
is
through
saying that
fire
you
to lift
didn't
them.
earn it. We're just saying everyone should have the opportunity to earn it. And these are the things, like, yes, you worked hard. Yes, you went through the schooling. Yes, you did all the things to get to where you are. That's great. Understand that not everyone has that opportunity and that there are systemic factors that interfere with that. Do you want to help? Here's how you help. If you don't want to help, cool, but move to the side and don't be an obstacle.
Yeah, just get out of the way. If you can't understand, I can't separate my God and my country from that. Cool. Be in the corner and do that.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
but get out the way.
Yeah.
So obviously, no, we could talk about this for hours. But like, obviously you have a ton of work, and obviously there's obviously all varying degrees of stress to get everything out at the right possible time and measure it all success. What does Adam do for self-care?
This is a good question, and I will fully admit, again, in the spirit of maybe helping someone else, I have not always been so good at self-care, and that has led to negative consequences related to health and mental health, or maybe you just say not negative, adverse consequences. And I met a therapist probably 5 years ago when I was still living in Chicago, who really working with him has been life changing in terms of finding those things that that I can show myself a little bit more kindness and respect. I think community is a big one, and that comes in a couple different forms for me. One, the big reason I moved home back to Colorado from Chicago is that my dad had a pretty severe stroke 6 years ago. So he's doing pretty good, but it's nice to be a 40-minute drive away from his house, even if it's just running up to get him to take him to a haircut, to go to the barbershop for a little while and connect with the community there. I think community is a big one. I also do jujitsu, um, and that is another really supportive community. And just finding other things like that. My barber is one of my good friends, and I love going to the barbershop every week, even if the fade is still looking pretty good. I go for it to get lined up at the barbershop because I really enjoy that connection, especially as someone who works remote. Those are hugely important to me. And then health wise, also, I been a snorer for a long time, was finally diagnosed with sleep apnea about a year and a half ago, and took me a while to find the right equipment, but I have a CPAP now that I was like, I don't need that. I'm never going to wear that. And then I remember famous Green Bay Packer Reggie White had a heart attack in his sleep at 42 years old and passed away.
Yeah.
So I put that CPAP on, and
Hmm.
getting that sleep, um, making sure I get at least 7 hours of quality sleep and developing a nighttime routine and a morning routine. Those are the things that I do to take care of myself, and they have paid off immensely in terms of my life and career fulfillment.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that because, again, Black men need to hear this. Rest, for the love of God. Please go to sleep.
Rest.
Please go to
Yeah.
therapy. And so I really appreciate you. Therapy and sleep. Thank you, Adam. I
Therapy
appreciate
and
that.
sleep and community. Yes. And
Yeah, I mean, the
exercise.
community can anything. I mean, from jiu-jitsu to the barbershop, like those are amazing aspects of it. And it's so very important. Again, I think that when the history is done of like what it means to survive as a Black person and thrive as a Black person, like centuries of stress is
Yeah,
passed down. So whatever you can do to help with that and mitigate against that, we must prioritize and do. Um,
absolutely.
so, so last question for you. Do you have a give and or ask of the audience?
I do have an ask for the audience. I, as a PR person, and this will sound like a gripe, but I do think it's important. What I realize when I'm explaining PR ideas or even talking about a specific outlet is a lot of people in our industry, but this extends to broader community. A lot of people in our industry only read news about themselves. So, not to say they don't read other things, but when it comes to paying attention to like how does PR actually show up in the final product, a lot of times people are only reading trade stories, and they don't know whether it's professionally or personally, what makes up good news. So, in terms of what makes up good news, you can pretty much throw all TV news out of the window. I won't say all of it, but a lot of TV news out of the window. But where are you sourcing your opinions on things, and do you understand what you're reading? If you are primarily getting your news through social media, I'll say I understand. But if you're not if you believe something that you see just in a headline and you're not Googling to look into it on a deeper level, media literacy is something that I'm hugely committed to and I think is really important. There is a very popular podcaster. His name rhymes with Mo Logan, and I had the opportunity to meet him. And in my previous job working at the United States Anti-Doping Agency, who did testing for UFC, and this person's part of that culture, he got a lot wrong. And again, it wasn't out of malice. It was just he was talking on a 3-hour podcast, but people take that information and run with it. So being able to ask questions and understanding what you might need to do additional research on in order to shape your opinion. And I find myself, I am just as susceptible to it as anyone else, but because it's my responsibility to do so as leader of PR for a major agency, I need to look into that deeper to see who's reporting this, who are the sources. If they're anonymous sources, can we trust that those are legitimate? If it's a piece of research, who funded the research? So I would just say, and yes, I'm a PR person, so my answers are long-winded, but I would just say, please understand what media literacy is, and then apply it the best you can as you take in your news in whatever form that comes in.
I love that. And it's 100% necessary. Like, for the love of God, please do it. It just makes life easier. It's just so important. Well, I don't I could talk to you forever. You've just been wonderful, and show why you're like the boss PR dude. Like, that's which I always say. I was like, oh, we have this bomb ass PR guy who works for us, and he knows everything. And you just spouted so much wonderful wisdom. I think folks will absolutely love to hear this. We're going to put all your details in the show notes for folks to find you, follow you, see where you're speaking next, what you're writing about next. Because, like I said, you just are a wealth of wonderful information, and you're a shining example of, like, let's be the unicorn and embrace all of it. So I'm so glad you were able to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure, and I hope that we can talk again. This was awesome.
Cool. We will. And that was our show.